Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Wednesday webinar with the Climate Emergency Centres Network. Tonight we have Sanjay Johal, who's one of the amazing people from Flooded People, and they are an organisation that is getting grassroots groups organised together to deal with flooding in their area. It's on the increase. How can we all work together to create resilient communities to deal with the floods and the storms that are to come? That's part of what we're all here doing, helping to build resilient communities. Over to you, Sanjay. Thank you very much for coming. Tell us about the brilliant work you do. Over.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, hi everyone. I'm just going to share some slides on the screen as well, just so um, can have a kind of bit of visual representation of what I'm going to talk about. And yeah, I'll go through those. Hopefully not too long, so it gives you a chance for questions. Apologies, I have to dip out a little bit earlier, but hopefully we've still got enough time for some questions. Um, Hopefully everybody can see the slides on the screen.
Yep, that's
That's
good.
brilliant. So yeah, nice to meet you all. So my name's Sanjay. I'm a community organizer for Flooded People UK. I've been working in flood risk and flood risk management for around about a decade now. And before that, I kind of did my undergraduate and postgraduate work in looking at flooding and how people are affected by it. So it's something that I hope I can share kind of a bit of a snapshot for you all. What I kind of want to just go through today with everyone is just few key things, really. A little bit about who we are and why we set up at Flooded People UK. Really take you through the journey of what a flooded person goes through and what kind of the reality is for somebody who floods in the UK. But also what that means for people in the aftermath and what can happen if people are given the ability who flooded to be able to kind of take things forward and kind of look at what they want. And then I'll finish off just with a little bit about why it's been quite important in the past year for kind of Flooded People UK to do some of this work. So really, I just want to focus on kind of that work together with flooded people, really giving you an idea of how many people are out there, what they go through. But really, kind of what I wanted to focus on towards the second half of kind of the chat today is really kind of what can be achieved and what flooded people actually want as part of kind of solutions to what's happening to them, essentially. Just a little bit about ourselves. So, Flooded People UK, we're coming up to our kind of first year together. We're a non-profit initiative, and we came together essentially for a mixture of people who have kind of worked in the climate sphere and climate world and looked at activism and supporting communities who are worried and interested in kind of tackling that climate emergency, but also people who've been working at the forefront in flooding and looking at how to support flooded people and help them through this. So what we're doing is really helping people to kind of understand what happens and kind of give a national outlook to it. We work together with local groups and individuals, hoping that bringing them together, they can help and support each other, but we can also help them as well. And what's really important to us is we're trying to build one national community of flooded people. There's a lot of different ways you can be flooded, but some of those experiences are shared and connected. And what we are trying to do is kind of identify those shared priorities and working with each other to attain them. In my previous role, one of the key things just to kind of give a snapshot to anybody, and if anybody here is flooded, I apologize. There'll be some things here that might you'll understand, and it might bring up some not really great memories. So please do let me know if there's anything that might cause kind of any undue stress, and I'll kind of skim over that. But essentially, one of the things we really wanted to do at Flooded People UK was bring that connective voice together. There's been some amazing work done at a local level from people who flooded, but one of the key things that was missing is that kind of national support and drive forward to kind of see how we could help flooded people, whether you live in the farthest parts of the country all the way down to the furthest part of the south, really. One of the key aspects that we do is myself as a community organizer. One of the things I'm really keen on is
Good
getting out
evening,
there,
all.
getting out there and speaking to people who flooded, supporting them, capturing what's happened to them. But really, one of the key tenets of what we're trying to do is build an online community. And one of the things that that online community does is a peer-to-peer support network. It's really important just to stress that it's very difficult if you're flooded or you've just flooded or you've gone through that and you're looking for information or you're looking for a way to understand where you can go, what you can do in the aftermath. And what we've built is an online community for people who've been flooded in their homes, have had flood water in, to kind of talk to each other and support. We also have other means for people who are interested to support that work but are not flooded themselves to kind of understand and kind of keep up to base and in touch with what Flooded People UK is doing. It's going really well in terms of with that support network. What we really want is the ability to help people in an event such as what's happening now. And in the last kind of 6 weeks, we've had a lot of communities, a lot of people who've been flooded, and it's been amazing to see how many people have joined our peer-to-peer support network to kind of look out for each other and find out how they can help each other. What I want to touch upon, though, which is really important, is to kind of put into context what it's like to flood. It's kind of astonishing to me, even in 2025, and with all the information out there, a lot of people kind of don't know what it's like for someone who's affected by a flood within the UK. And I'm going to just paint a snapshot of what it's like to cope with the flood. One of the key things to remember is emergency management and work within the UK is fairly well robust and quite a lot of professionals working it, and there's quite a lot of systems in place. But essentially, that management of an emergency or a disaster tends to look at kind of preparation before the disaster, potentially what to do during it, and also maybe looking at the kind of mitigation. One thing it tends to kind of skim over is the recovery phase, or what happens to somebody after the blue lights or the emergency services declared an incident over. And this is kind of where we step in at Flooded People UK. Here are just some quotes of what it's like for people who've been through that. And it won't be a surprise maybe to people that it's traumatic. Flooding does disrupt your life. I'll share a little bit of information about how it can disrupt your life. And it can have a different amount of reactions for people going through different phases of that flooding. People suffer huge psychological stresses. They can be devastating. Many times I've spoken to people after the event, you're looking at anywhere between a year, 2 years, 3 years later, the stress continues and it continues beyond the recovery process. And it can leave people very, very disorientated. Their whole world is upside down. Flooding, water management, flood management, it kind of dominates your life. Conversations at home become about how this doesn't happen again. And also, it kind of really, really becomes your focus. And then the final one there, just at the bottom of the page, is really important just to say is that people who are affected by this, they're affected in places which are their sanctuaries. You know, these are places where we all come at the end of a day, we try to relax, we try to kind of shut the world away. And what's happened is that unfortunately that can't happen once you've been flooded. And even long after you're back in, your problem is there in terms of anxiety and stress. It's just a bit of an example of that. One of the things that was done by Public Health England was is they looked into a study into looking at people who've been affected by a flood, so flood water in your house. What happens to you, and what are the kind of follow-on effects to either your physical or mental health and well-being? This was really meant to be a 10-year study, I believe, and then in just about a year's worth of capturing data and information, it was quite apparent that probably didn't need 10 years to really kind of lay bare the shocking statistics that are out there. So if you're flooded in your house, you are approximately 6 to 7 times more likely to have depression, anxiety, or a post-traumatic stress disorder a year on compared to people who are not flooded by an event. So if we're thinking about the current storm and the ones that have preceded it this year, if you've been affected by that flood, if water has got into your house, you will be 6 to 7 times more likely to have some of those symptoms. If the water that gets into your property reaches a depth of over 100 centimeters within your house, those multiplying factors skyrocket. So you're 15 times more likely to have depression, you're 11 times more likely to have anxiety, and 18 times likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. So that just shows you that the what happens when you get flooded and what happens when water enters your property has a long-lasting effect. it's not just the effect on the person and the individual and the property that happened as well. It's also what happens to people in and around as well. So your whole kind of system of infrastructure is disrupted. So you lose access to things. You're not able to get places. You can have access to things such as work or education. There's multiple factors there as well that really kind of exacerbate having some kinds of symptoms that will really affect your day-to-day kind of living. But what I really wanted to stress with this is that when we're talking in the context of what we can do and what we can think about when looking at the solutions, it's really, really important to remember that flooded people who have lived this, who have gone through it, really, really need to be at the center and forefront of what solutions can be kind of attuned. One thing that's I'd like to mention as well, just before we go into the kind of how to support and how we help people and what flooded people would like is one thing flooded people tell me a lot over the last 10 years is please do not use the dreaded R word with me, resilience. You're looking at probably the most resilient people in this country if you've been flooded once or especially multiple times. A lot of the information out there for people when we're talking about resilience is about preparation. It's about understanding what's going to happen. Well, actually, for people who've been affected by this, hat, t-shirt, whatever you want to call it, they have it all. They understand what needs to happen. They understand what needs to go through. What's the struggle is trying to get people to understand this is what they're left with afterwards. So I probably won't use the word resilience, but what I will use is action, looking at what needs to happen and kind of moving forward with solutions. It's just an example of property that can be damaged and what you have to face once the floodwater's gone. So flooding can happen through many different avenues. Water doesn't decide that it's part of a certain responsibility of a certain agency. It gets into your home. If you live next to a river, if you live next to a small tributary off a river, it can get into your property. If you live somewhere where there's large drainage systems or infrastructure that's not well kept, you can get flooded by what's called surface water flooding, just water off the road. You can get flooded from the groundwater if the groundwater table's high. You can get flooded from a host of other places as well. If you live along the sea as well, there's coastal flooding. So when we think about living on a small island like we are, there is a lot of different avenues for us to get flooded. And the cleanup or the aftermath is where it really, really can affect you. Your home's destroyed, your possessions destroyed. It can take a long time. On average, it can take anywhere between 18 months to a year, sorry, a year to 18 months to be back into what's called a habitable or normal range of living again. Just some of the things over the years that people who've been flooded say happens to them. As mentioned before, your life turned upside down. You have health problems. They can be part of physical health problems or your mental well-being as well. One of the things that happens a lot is the fear of repeat flooding. It never goes away. Most of the things I will do when I'm on call supporting people is people phoning me when there's a dark cloud or a flood warning out there. It really, really scares people. You're out of your home. But one of the things to remember is that a lot of the time when professional bodies or people who are looking to think about disaster management or tackle this talk about resilience, they think it's important to get back into your property as quick as possible. But there are some things that can't be replaced in your property, memorabilia, possessions that mean something to you. It's really, really important. I remember one time working with an individual who really, really stoic, very, very kind of practical, but kind of broke down once he'd found out that his family photo albums had been destroyed. Memorabilia gone that you can't replace. So it's really, really important to think of the hidden cost of flooding as well that people might not be able to share with you. Families can be disrupted. If you have children, if you have small children, if you have anything where a normal day-to-day routine, you don't have that anymore. And these things happen on a regular basis. I think one of the unheard things about a disaster like flooding is it doesn't have to be a named storm and it doesn't have to be in the news. These can happen anywhere. They can happen sporadically or in localized places where you get a very heavy rainstorm event. And again, I just this picture's very powerful image to me, which is people being told to be resilient, put things up on stilts, raise things so they don't get wet, make sure you're ready for the water to come in. And as I mentioned before, people who are some of the most resilient people in the country will say, okay, I'll invite the water into my house, but please leave quickly. People know what to do. What's not okay is to have it happen repeatedly and have it happen again. When I first kind of came into working and supporting flooded people, you might have a kind of generalistic idea of when these events are going to happen. And then, really, with the ever increasing events due to climate change, these happen more often now. People are now being flooded 5 times in 6 years in some cases. So, this is not something that is down to just unique one off events, so to speak. I think one thing I always do when I talk about this, just to finish off, is that it's very difficult to explain in a talk or a quick webinar what it's like to be affected by this. But one thing I always take away from these is how would you cope? Resilience is about, sometimes they say, about bouncing back, preparing, understanding, but also how would you cope if this was where you're sitting now, where you're likely to spend most of your time. It's your home, it's your, as we say, every person's home is their castle. How would you feel if you had came home or you woken up in the middle of the night to something like this? And this is what's kind of happening to people on a regular basis, and is kind of not really talked about often until there's a big event that is picked up by national media. So what do we need to do? So what do we need to look forward to? We can understand that people go through this. We can understand there are people out there. Well, first of all, it's really important again that we look at the narratives and the information being given. Well, okay, so we have to put it into two categories really. Engaging with people who are at flood risk. So you may live in an area where you may flood, you haven't flooded, or you might not have experienced flooded. And then there's the areas where you have flooded, you have experienced it, or you have flooded multiple times. And in those areas, it's really important, and this is where Flooded People UK are, we're keen to make sure that the right engagement, the right support is given to those flooded people. The context needs to be there. You need to understand that people here do not need information on how to prepare for the next event. What they need to know is how it's going to be alleviated, how it's going to be reduced, and hopefully how it's going to be stopped. And that's where good engagement comes in. And a lot of the work that I do as a community organizer, or what we do at Flooded People, is understanding where and how people can get that information. What we really need and what's really important is we need to make sure that flooded people shape how they feel their flooding is going to be tackled. If you've been affected by it, you've lived through it, you understand some of the kind of nuances, and you also then understand why you don't want it to happen. It's really important that things after an event, when you're looking at what happened, what went wrong, what needs to happen again, those protocols, those management systems have through it a thread of what flooded people would like to happen and see. And it's really important about this because currently sometimes understanding those expectations and making sure that there's a kind of synergy between what's happening afterwards by the people in charge and what is the reality needs to be explained to people who've been affected by it. It's very, very important that we don't become a culture of just on to the next one and let's prepare for the next event. It's not right to have a society where people live in constant fear of this happening to them again. So one advice I would give is if you ever speak to a flooded person or there are people in your networks who have flooded, it's important not to go to them and treat them as they do not understand what's happened to them and they do not understand the context. I'm speaking to you all here today who I assume you're passionate and you care about the climate emergency and you want something to happen. I can tell you I've met some of the most ardent, hardcore climate skeptics who will understand quite clearly what happens during a climate emergency because they felt it, they've lived through it. So listening to those issues they face and understanding that they've lived experience is really, really important. That way, what tends to happen if you don't do that is you dismiss their concerns, concepts, and ideas. And then what happens is you don't understand what those communities need to do. Long after the blue lights and emergency services gone, it's the communities within those it's the flooded people within those communities that will then pick up the slack. It's really, really important. A lot of the work that we do as well is making sure that we need to make sure that this kind of engagement, this kind of work with flooded communities is equitable. Make sure that they're a valued partner together. It's got to be participatory. It shouldn't be top down and spoken to. Involvement itself doesn't just mean what a lot of flooded people tell me, which is small sticky plaster solutions, things like clearing ditches, having resilience measures and products. While important and while needed, what we need to understand is the context in which the flood has happened and what people need. And what we need to make sure is that people can engage, people can talk, they can use their local knowledge and expertise. All of you where you live, if you've lived there for many years, you will have that local knowledge and expertise. Flooded people have a similar knowledge and expertise based on where they're flooded. If we don't do that, if you don't understand and make use of that, what will then happen is poorer and unaccepted plans. People won't trust in people coming to help. It needs to be formed kind of from the bottom and ground up, really. So what I just want to finish on before you've got any questions for me really is, well, what do flooded people want? So one of the things we're doing, as well as the allowing people to have a mutual aid platform and to support each other if they've been flooded and had floodwater in their house, is what happens next. What is it that people want? And one of the key things that we did is that when we first went out to speak to communities and engaged and supported them, we asked them, we gave them surveys and asked what would it be that you would want if we didn't have barriers put in place or excuses that might come out. Well, these were some of the things that came out of that, which is, I don't want to flood again. I understand that these things will happen and I understand that these events are getting increasing. But one thing that really sticks out to me was somebody said, I don't want to be offered sticky plaster solutions. I want well-rounded whole solutions that help everything. And that for flooded people is better policy around the reduction of their flood risk. Something that sticks with me very, very clear in mind is somebody said to me, if we could send somebody to the moon in 1969, we should be able to have flood infrastructure that stops us flooding repeatedly. And listening to people's thoughts on that. Also, what's really important is not to be put into competition with other objectives. A lot of people who are affected by flooded understand the need to make sure that we look after our environment, that we make sure that things are done in a prism and a sphere of making sure that we regenerate the environment and we keep it healthy. But what they don't want is their flood risk and their flood reduction to be at the cost of that. And also what's really important to flooded people is that they don't want to be told they need to change their behaviours and they need to get used to it. What they want is governments to be able to change their behaviours and make sure that they are the ones looking at those approaches and reductions. So having a standardised measure that every person in this country will have a certain standard of flood protection. And that's really important because there is sometimes, and maybe you find it yourselves in working in climate emergency and working when working in your communities around this, there is a them and us approach. But what's really important is that the them and us is becoming closer because, again, by sharing and giving flooded people that equitable voice, you then change the narrative that governments do. One of the things we're very proud of and we worked with is that of all the communities and members and people who are working with us at Flooded People UK, we managed to make sure that their thoughts and opinions were given to a climate environmental audit committee who looked at flooding. And essentially one of the things that we said, based on what flooded people told us, is that flood risk management is reactive, disjointed. It's undermining the possibility of effective strategy. And what was really important to say at things like the Environmental Audit Committee was then you can see that they understood that actually the current flood risk framework is underpowered and fragmented, and the system is reactive and it is costly, and that resilience remains a vague ambition rather than a deliverable goal. So just making sure that the thoughts, viewpoints and feelings of people who are affected by disasters and lived experience such as this gets into policy is really important to us. It's about time as well. It's about people thinking that, you go back home, your flood's finished, and you go, well, actually, the other side is making sure that we keep people understanding what flooded people go through, coming to spaces like yourselves, talking about this, making sure that we can show that people do not forget about this and people fight for this for years. And again, just a little couple of quotes there on people who have been doing this for many years, who have been affected by floods, 25 years in some examples, and they assure you that they will not give up. They will not stop that fight. And that injustice and anger and that energy fuels them to make sure that they can keep their feet to the fire of the people that need to make these changes. Just a really good one example before I finish. Again, a community we worked with in Nottinghamshire. They amazingly managed to get a deferral of a development that would have increased the flood risk. And then they shared, and we helped them share that story across media and making sure that they got their story out, to which there was people probably getting a little bit worried and seeing that this might set a precedent. We've got to allow people the ability to fight and push forward. So I just leave it with this before any questions, is that one of the important things that we do and with flooded people is we've got to make sure that people and communities have a making people and communities safe is an essential public service. And in terms of flooding, it's really, really key. If you know of anybody who might have been affected with current storms, or they just have been flooded in the past internally and they would like to have support on that network, I've left my details with Phoenix, and you can please do send them our way. If you'd like to know more about what we do, we have a newsletter that you can sign up to and support. And even if you're not a flooded person, it'd be great to have you on there again. All those links are on our website and those details are there, and it'd be brilliant to kind of have you on board. Thank you.
Sanjay, that was fantastic, and thank you for all the incredible work you're doing to help and support people going through that traumatic situations. I've got a question or so, but if folks want to ask a question or comment or feedback, there's a heart reaction button at the bottom. You can stick your hand up like that, and we'll see who's one, two, three. But do you work much with Sanjay? Do you work much with the local resilience forums? We've been chatting with the GLA recently and other resilience forums, and that's some of the more emergency services for those who don't know, linking together with the councils in each area. Are there any particular bodies that you link with as flooded people and that you feel that are making some good headway or could do better? Over.
Yeah, so in my previous role, I was working in London. We were supporting 5 communities who'd flooded just after the 2021 event in July, and did some work with the GLA there. With the
Was that
resilience.
Stratford? And sorry to jump in there. Was that Stratford and West London? There were floods in tube stations.
No, no, it was actually flooded communities and houses. So it was in Walthamstow, Waltham Borough, Waltham Forest Borough mainly, some areas in Camden, and also some areas just kind of towards Southwark as well. And one of the key things there was just to answer your second part of your question with LRS. Yes, I think the important thing when we spoke to GLAs is that differentiation of if you're trying to speak to people who are at risk, the messaging is different, and local resilience forums need to work on that, which is quite important work. But that's then very different to people who've been affected by a flood. What tends to happen is the work that needs to happen there is kind of once people have had the ability to kind of recover and get back into the properties, what they then want is long-term support on getting answers and finding out what's going to happen to reduce that risk.
Cool, cool. Okay, thanks, Sanjay, and massive respect for what you and the folks at Flooded People are doing. That's real citizens' initiatives, and we are quite often the first responders and the people that deal with the situations. We need more support. And as a friend who's been studying some of these things and resilience forums. He really wants to see community groups having more of a seat at the table with the local authorities and these, LRFs so that we can put in what we need to get more help. Hopefully we can see that a bit more. But coming over to Helen, then Tina, then Mbani Friday over in Nigeria, I think. Helen, good news on a new climate hub potentially coming in Southampton. Helen, over. Yeah, unmute.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Um, so in Southampton, there's been a move for a river charter for the Itchen, and we're kind of working on preparing that. Have you been involved in that kind of work? Like river rights groups or citizen river stewardship stuff? And might you be
N-
interested?
not
As
necessarily in terms of supporting flooded people. I think what flooded people normally tend to concentrate and focus on is making sure that the river that's near them or the watercourse doesn't flood them again. What flooded people are interested in is catchment management. So in part of that a lot of the work that I've done in the past is that there's a need, and a lot of people who flooded understand that you need to look at the catchment as a whole. So a
Mm,
lot of the time there's a lot of piecemeal stuff done. So when we talk about natural flood management, or we talk about sustainable drainage, or we talk about better farming practices, or looking after river ecology systems, it needs to be bit from column A, bit from column B, bit from column C. What tends to sometimes happen is that if there's one focus on one particular aspect, the others are missed. So a lot of flooded people, communities I work with, are really keen and really supportive of something like the catchment-based approach. So a bit of work that I did in the future was, well, how can you get flooded people and communities to work alongside maybe organisations like yourselves or community groups or others to kind of make sure that that catchment approach, as well as looking at the things that you're passionate and keen about, also then factors in how can we make the whole to reduce that flood risk. I have worked with, and there is a community in St Denis in that area who
that's right.
flooded.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, St Denis
Yeah.
community. So a lot of the stuff is around St Denis because that is a very high flood risk. And if you look at the maps going ahead, it's a lot of it's threatened to be completely underwater. So as you're
Mm.
aware, then if you've worked with St Denis.
Yeah, so I think it's anything you do, and anybody on the call that with these aspects, it's really key. I suppose from an angle of a flooded person, what they're really interested in is how does that reduction in flood risk happen with the work going on as well.
Mm.
Oh, thank you. Tina, M, and Batesy up in Northampton, the Umbrella Centre. Looks like we might be needing a few umbrellas. Lovely to see you, Batesy.
Yeah, hello guys. Yeah, Sanjay. Um, we're we're a climate emergency centre, a climate emergency action hub actually, and direct protest is really, we think, a key part to what should be happening, as well as resilience work and community work. So I just wondered, what's flooded people doing on a national and then on a local level to actively change policy on flood management and mitigation, and what's flooded people's position on direct protest, direct action protest?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so part of the work that we did this year was we then went out to these communities and spoke to people who were either local activists or people who've been fighting flooding for a long time. And we had a gathering in Birmingham in November after about 11 months of speaking to people. And there was kind of three clear things that came out of that gathering is, well, what does the campaign nationally we want to talk about do, and how does it help flooded people, and what are the set of demands in terms of policy change that people want from that. And it went really well. And one of the key things that came out of that was is it needs to be a mixture really. There needs to be local continuation of local work between communities and what they're doing and trying to achieve that. But by linking them together, we can then focus on those key policy demands and how we do it. So from a campaigning angle, I would probably say that my colleagues who have kind of maybe worked in similar spheres to yourself are working on that, and we're looking at how we do that. But I think the key clear one that we have at the moment is ensuring that there's a standardized flood protection for every resident, including yourself, across the country, wherever you live, rather than based on a kind of cost benefit means tested approach that we have at the moment.
Does that help, Batesy?
Yeah, yeah.
We
Yeah,
need
be
some.
interesting. Maybe I'll contact Sanjay and just see where Northampton, we get flooded. We live on a boat. We've been flooded twice. Obviously not on the boat, but we couldn't get near the boat. So we're part of a community that's affected, as well as representing communities affected. So it'd be interesting to contact him directly and develop some ideas around pressurising local councils.
Yeah, I've left my details. That'd be really good to catch up with you. And yeah, we can. Part of the other thing that myself and my other colleague who does community organisers, we'd love to come out and kind of visit anybody like that or yourself who's been affected. So yeah, my details are there. Let's have a catch up after this for sure.
Cool. Sanjay, I'm really conscious you're on Storm Watch tonight and you got to go at 45. So I might
Mm.
just, we'll come back to some other questions shortly, folks, and people can stay around and chat for a while. But I just want to, Sanjay, before we roll on past your time, you've got to get on the Storm Watch. Thank you for your service. Could you just want to do a little parting comment, whatever you want to share with people afterwards about flooded people and any way we can help? How can we support? Get your message out, link up, whatever it is. Over.
Yeah, so please do. Sorry, Barney, I didn't get to you, but if you got a question, if you type it in, I'm sure I'll get it afterwards and can answer. My email and details can be shared, so please do share them around Phoenix. That's no problem. If you've got any questions for me, that'd be great. And just really, if there's any flooded people that you know of or areas, especially after this, in any of the areas you're working, and you think they could use our support, brilliant. You can They can go onto our website and find a link to kind of join our mutual aid group, but it'd be really good to kind of have interested activists and people working this who join up and sign to our newsletter, because I think part of the other side is bringing in allies and people like yourselves to see if they can support with it other ways. And there was, sorry, one other question in the chat, which was about the slides. What I can do is I'll have to take away some of the images and info on that because they were specifically given to me, but I can share the main aspects of the presentation if anybody would like those afterwards as well.
Brilliant. All power
Yeah,
to you on the Flooded People team. He's got to go at 45. So thank you very much for your time, Sanjay, and respect to all the flooded people. Let's build networks of people supporting each other for these floods, storms, and whatever is to come and work our way through it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.